thank you, Marina, for joining us for the last edition of ACLU on the Hill. The last day of the session after 45 days. How do you feel?
Tired.
I imagine.
But we made it.
That's right. Just a couple more hours left.
Right.
We thought today we'd go through sort of the greatest hits, the biggest bills of the session so far. It's been a pretty exciting session. We've covered a lot of ACLU territory. And some of these bills will have to go back several weeks to remember exactly what they were. But one that has consistently been a big bill for us is HB 57, the digital privacy bill from Representative Craig Hall. That bill passed just this week, finally, right?
Yeah, it was sitting out there waiting for a vote for quite a while, and thankfully got that final vote, and so is now headed to the governor's desk. And a really important piece of legislation, making clear that a warrant is now required not just for electronic data that's stored on your phone, for example, but also if that data happens to be held by a third party, let's say a cell phone service provider, or if electronic data sort of is transmitted to a third party, tells information about the places that you go, the websites you like to see. All of that information is now subject to a warrant.
Now, what about data that's stored in a cloud? Like, let's say we have iCloud or Dropbox. Did this bill apply to data that you store in a third-party location, a third-party server?
Absolutely. That's precisely one of the things that the bill targets.
Great. And is this bill one of the first in the country to kind of increase this protection to third-party cloud-based data?
I believe it is, in fact. It really picks up where the Supreme Court left off in the Carpenter case that was decided just last summer, holding that cell phone service location information held by a third party is subject to a warrant. And this bill goes further and says not just that type of information, but really any data that's held by a third party provider is subject to a warrant now as well.
So other states could be looking to Utah, which is something that this state likes to model and sort of copy this legislation going forward.
Absolutely, especially in sort of the electronic privacy realm.
So a win in the Fourth Amendment column, a search and seizure and criminal protections for government overreach, I guess. And
a win for Utahns.
Yeah, great. Now, one other bill that I wanted to talk about in the criminal justice vein, actually was a series of bills, but one we wanted to focus on was HB 431, Representative Hutchins' bill based on expungement.
Yeah.
Expungement is a word that maybe not a lot of people understand. Can you tell us a little bit about it?
Yeah, this is the idea that you'd be able to sort of clear your criminal record, several years into the future if you've gone for a number of years without committing any further crimes and sort of kept your record clean, that you have the opportunity to have that record cleared. And the reason that's so important is because a criminal record can have all sorts of consequences for somebody who's trying to rebuild their life. In particular, we see consequences that flow in terms of the ability to secure a job or find housing, which are two really important things that if somebody's trying to get back on their feet, it's really important to be able to find housing, find employment, to sort of stay stable. And so if your record is holding you up and making it more difficult to achieve those goals, then it really does nobody any good. So what Representative Hutchins' bill would do is take some categories of crimes, very low-level crimes in particular, and create an automatic process so that an individual doesn't actually even have to go to court and petition the court to have their record cleared, but that after a certain number of years, those records would just disappear, given that somebody, of course, dots all their I's and crosses all their T's and does everything they need to keep their record clean.
Got it. So it seems like the key words for this legislation are low-level crimes and automatic. That the person doesn't actually have to go see a lawyer or fill out forms. It just evaporates after a set number of years. Is it 7 years or 10 years?
It depends on the crime, but yes, that's right. A certain number of years. And, I think it's really important to make clear that increasingly a lot of Americans have a criminal record. It's interesting to note, actually, that as many Americans have a criminal record as have a 4-year college degree. So this is something that's holding back a lot of individuals in our community and will be a really important and meaningful piece of legislation for lots of Utahns.
Every once in a while, there's those bills that actually touch many lives that aren't just focused on a specific special interest or a couple people here or there, but have the impact across the entire state. And this seems like one of those bills.
Definitely one of those.
Now let's go back to the early days of the session, to HB 153. This was a bill that was introduced early on, got some fierce backlash both in Utah and nationally, and eventually was pulled. The sponsor, after many conversations, Utahns agreed to pull the legislation. It had to do with birth certificates and
Right.
gender identity and gender, sort of transgender folks here in Utah. Can you tell us about that?
Yeah, so I think this is one of several bills that we were seeing sort of across the country that were really targeting the transgender community. We'd seen some efforts in previous years to make it easier for transgender Utahns to change their records, and most notably their birth certificate, which often serves as the base point for changing all sorts of other documents, driver's licenses and the like. But nevertheless, this bill was actually a step backwards and would have made clear that it was essentially sort of impossible for transgender individuals to change their birth certificates. Luckily, after many discussions with the sponsor and lots of involvement from community partners and stakeholders, there was a movement to pull this bill back and sort of wait on this issue for the time being. And so the bill did not advance.
Did not advance, and that was within the first couple of weeks of the session. In the last few weeks of the session, we saw a lot of attention focused on the conversion therapy bill.
Right.
The bill sponsored, I believe, by Representative Craig Hall, that would have outlawed many forms of conversion therapy. It got substituted in committee. The sponsor turned against it. Quite a big backlash. You know, what do you see for the future of these bills dealing with gender identity, transgender individuals, this sort of nexus of the public sphere and people's identities?
Yeah, I think this is just the beginning, really. We're just starting that conversation, especially when we're talking about conversion therapy. This is the first year we've seen a bill introduced on the topic. It often takes several years to pass a really meaningful and substantial piece of legislation. And I think what was very clear in the hearings on this bill is the level of education that still needs to be done around what it means to be LGBT and what it means to talk about conversion therapy, what that actually is and what are the harmful effects of that sort of treatment, and why we really need to make sure that we have policy in place to protect our young people. So I think this is just the beginning. I think we'll see it again emerge next session as well. I think Representative Hall did an excellent job of understanding that once this bill had been amended, it was essentially hijacked. It was no longer a meaningful bill in terms of providing protection, and that it was actually better at that point to no longer support the legislation and wait for an additional year.
But at least at the end of this session, a lot more people understand what conversion therapy is. There's going to be more attention, more discussion, and hopefully more legislators. The next time it comes up, we'll be able to sort of ask the right questions, get the right input about it.
Yeah, that's the hope.
All right, and let's touch on a couple more somewhat controversial bills at the end of the session. One that just came up and passed last night was HB 136, the 18-week abortion ban, which looks like it's heading to the governor's desk. And if he signs it, the ACLU has come out and said that we will pursue litigation.
Yeah, I mean, I think that we absolutely have to. This is an unconstitutional on its face and has real implications for the lives of Utah.